Korea, November 1951. The world had shrunk to the inside of an M46 Patton tank. Lieutenant Marshal Steele could taste copper in his mouth as smoke filled the cramped interior. Outside, the hellish orchestra of war played on, the distinctive crack of Soviet 85mm shells, the rattle of machine gun fire against armor, the screams of men. "Loader hit!" shouted Corporal Jenkins from his position. "He's bleeding bad, sir." Steele wiped blood from his own eyes. A shell had struck their position moments ago, sending shrapnel through the viewport. His right leg burned where a jagged piece of metal had embedded itself, but there was no time for pain. "Keep pressure on his wound," Steele commanded, scanning the battlefield through his periscope. 3 T-34s had them surrounded, their olive-drab forms hulking against the gray Korean winter landscape. American infantry lay pinned down behind what remained of a stone wall. No air support, no artillery. They were alone. "Radio's dead, sir," reported his driver, face ghost white with fear. "We can't call for backup." Steele felt a strange calm settle over him, the kind that comes only when options narrow to a single point. "Jenkins, take the loader to the escape hatch. When I give the word, you get him out and run for that ridge." "Sir, what about you?" "I'll cover your retreat." "But Lieutenant," Steele turned, fixing his young corporal with a gaze that brooked no argument. "That's an order, son." Swinging into the gunner's position, Steele rotated the turret toward the nearest T-34. His hands moved with practiced precision despite the pain coursing through his body. Distance, 400 yards. Elevation, adjusted for terrain. One shot, one chance. "Now Jenkins, go." As his men scrambled out the escape hatch, Steele fired. The 90mm shell struck the enemy tank at its weakest point, where turret met hull. A secondary explosion followed as ammunition cooked off inside. One down. The remaining T-34s turned their guns toward him. Steele traversed the turret, loading another shell himself despite the cramped space. Fire! The second T-34's tracks shattered, immobilizing it. A shell struck his Patton, rocking the 30-ton vehicle like a child's toy. Systems failed. Warning lights blazed across the control panel. Smoke poured in through ruptured seals. Steele loaded his final shot. Through the viewport, he could see his men had almost reached safety. Just a few more seconds. The tank was burning now, temperature rising, paint bubbling on interior walls. He fired. The third T-34 erupted in flames. With his men safe and the enemy neutralized, Steele dragged himself from the burning hulk of his tank. His right leg barely functioning, uniform soaked with blood. Around him lay the broken landscape of war. Through smoke and pain, he saw the American flag still attached to his tank's antenna, somehow untouched by the destruction. Steele pulled himself upright. Using a piece of twisted metal as a makeshift cane, he reached for the flag. Standing atop his ruined tank, leg bleeding and lungs burning, he raised the stars and stripes high. A combat photographer captured the moment. Marshal Steele, silhouetted against a gray Korean sky, standing defiantly atop a burning tank, American flag held high above the battlefield. The image would grace the cover of Life magazine, a symbol of American resolve in a war few understood, but none could forget. The men who served with him that day would give him a nickname that would follow him for the rest of his career. Iron Mike. Pentagon, Washington, D.C., April 1962. "With all due respect, General, I'm a tank commander, not a bureaucrat." Captain Marshal Iron Mike Steele stood at parade rest in General Wallace Porter's office, his weathered face expressionless, despite the storm brewing inside. At 53, Steele's once dark hair had given way to distinguished silver at the temples. His posture remained ramrod straight, though the cane at his side spoke of old wounds that never fully healed. "This isn't a request, Captain." General Porter pushed a folder across his desk. "Project ASR 106 needs your expertise." "Advanced Scout Reconnaissance," Steele read from the folder. "I train tank crews, sir. I don't design vehicles." Porter leaned back in his leather chair. "You were recommended specifically. Your combat experience in Korea makes you uniquely qualified." Steele's jaw tightened. Korea. 11 years since that frozen hellscape, yet sometimes he still woke smelling burning diesel and flesh. "We're developing the next generation of armored reconnaissance vehicles," Porter continued. "The Soviets have deployed something new in East Germany. Fast, well-armed, deadly. Intelligence suggests they're mounting guided anti-tank missiles on light armored chassis." Steele remained unmoved. "There are younger men better suited for this, sir." Porter's expression hardened. Your son among them, perhaps? The mention of Michael landed like a physical blow. Steele's hand tightened involuntarily around his cane. Major Michael Steele is stationed with the 3rd Armored Division in Fulda, correct? Porter continued. Right on the East German border, the first line of defense against Soviet armor. Leave my son out of this, General. I can't. None of us can. The vehicles we develop now are the ones your son and his men will ride into battle if the balloon goes up. Porter stood, walking to a wall map of Europe divided by a stark red line. The Soviets have twice our tank strength in Europe. If they push west, our boys will be outnumbered and outgunned unless we give them a technological edge. Steele stared at the map, seeing not colored lines, but terrain, killing grounds, places where American boys might die if their equipment failed them. You're not designing a tank for the Pentagon, Captain, Porter said quietly. You're designing it for the soldiers who will fight and possibly die in it. Soldiers like your son. The room fell silent, save for the soft ticking of a wall clock. Finally, Steele's shoulders lowered a fraction of an inch. When do I start? Tomorrow, Arlington Research Facility. Porter handed him a security badge. Oh, and Steele? This project has competing interests. Watch your back. The Arlington Research Facility hummed with activity as Steele made his way through security checkpoints. His cane tapped a steady rhythm against polished floors. The guard at the final checkpoint examined his credentials with exaggerated care. Captain Steele, they're expecting you in conference room C. Steele nodded, feeling out of place among the white lab coats and suits. His uniform, adorned with combat ribbons and jump wings, belonged to a different world than this sterile environment of fluorescent lights and whispered conversations. Conference room C fell silent as he entered. 8 faces turned toward him, some curious, some dismissive, one openly hostile. Captain Steele, welcome. A woman in her late 40s approached, hand extended. Her grip was firm, her eyes intelligent. Dr. Eleanor Wright, chief engineer, we've been expecting you. Doctor? Steele shook her hand, noting the wedding band worn alongside an Air Force service ring. Allow me to make introductions. She gestured around the table. Colonel William Harrison, project manager. A tall, trim man in his mid-50s nodded curtly. His uniform bore the insignia of Armor Branch, though Steele suspected the man had seen more desk time than tank time. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Donovan, liaison from our friends at Langley. A nondescript man with watchful eyes offered a thin smile. CIA, then. Interesting. The rest of our team includes Dr. Chen, Propulsion Systems, Dr. Miller, Ballistics, Mr. Abernathy from Titanium Defense Corporation, and Mrs. Sloan, our administrative director. Steele acknowledged each with a nod, cataloging faces and positions. His attention caught on the final man, seated slightly apart from the others. Something familiar in the weathered face, the calloused hands. And this is Technical Sergeant John Romano, our chief mechanic. The man stood, a broad grin spreading across his face. They still calling you Iron Mike, sir? Recognition dawned. Wrench, Johnny Romano? In the flesh, Captain. Memories flooded back. Romano had been a tank mechanic in Korea. The man could fix anything with moving parts using nothing but spit and determination. You two know each other, Wright asked. Sergeant Romano kept my tanks running in Korea, Steele said. Saved my life more than once with his repairs. Someone had to keep you from getting yourself killed, sir, Romano replied with a wink. Colonel Harrison cleared his throat impatiently. Now that reunions are complete, perhaps we can begin? The room settled as Harrison took control, dimming lights for a slide presentation. Project ASR-106 is developing the next generation of armored reconnaissance vehicles. Light, air-transportable, but with significant firepower. Images flashed across the screen, Soviet tanks rolling through East Berlin, new armored vehicles with distinctive missile launchers. The Soviets have deployed the BRDM-2 reconnaissance vehicle with AT-3 Sagar missiles. For the first time, light vehicles can destroy main battle tanks from beyond direct fire range. Steele studied the images with professional interest. The Soviet vehicle looked capable, if ungainly. Our response is 2 parallel development tracks, Harrison continued. ASR-106 for ultralight reconnaissance and ASR-110 for heavier applications. The lights came up. Harrison fixed Steele with a cool stare. Captain Steele will be consulting on ASR-106, while I personally oversee ASR-110. Wright handed out folders containing schematics and specifications. Steele leafed through the designs, frowning at what he saw. Questions, Captain? Harrison asked, noting Steele's expression. Several. Steele held up a design. This vehicle has no protection for the crew. One hit with small arms fire and everyone inside is dead. It's designed for speed and stealth, not direct engagement, Harrison replied dismissively. Enemy doesn't always give you a choice about engagement, Steele countered, and this one has the main gun fixed forward. Driver has to aim the entire vehicle? Weight savings, offered Dr. Miller. At the cost of combat effectiveness. Steele continued through the designs, his frown deepening. None of these would survive first contact with the enemy. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Harrison's face reddened. These designs represent months of work by top engineers. And zero input from combat veterans, Steele replied evenly. You're designing coffins on tracks, Colonel. Harrison stood abruptly. We selected you for combat experience, Captain, not engineering critique. Your role is advisory only. Final decisions rest with me. Steele met the man's gaze without blinking. Then why am I here? A valid question, came a new voice from the doorway. All heads turned. A silver-haired man in an expensively tailored suit stood watching the proceedings with interest. Senator Brooks, Harrison said, surprise evident in his voice. We weren't expecting you until next week's review. I decided to come early. Senator Robert Brooks, chairman of the Armed Services Committee, entered the room with the confidence of a man accustomed to power, especially after hearing Captain Steele was joining the project. Brooks approached Steele, hand extended. Captain, it's an honor. My son served in Korea. Still keeps that Life magazine with your picture. Steele shook the senator's hand, uncomfortable with the recognition. Just doing my job, sir. The job now, Brooks said, addressing the room, is developing vehicles that keep our boys alive while accomplishing the mission. He fixed Harrison with a pointed look. I understand there are two projects running concurrently? Harrison nodded stiffly. Yes, Senator. ASR 106 and ASR 110. Dual development tracks mean twice the cost, Brooks observed. Defense budgets aren't unlimited, Colonel. We need efficiency. ASR 110 represents the future, Harrison said quickly. Titanium Defense has already invested significant resources. Brooks nodded to the corporate representative, then turned to Steele. In your opinion, Captain? Steele measured his words carefully. I haven't been briefed on ASR 110, Senator, but these ASR 106 designs prioritize theory over battlefield reality. Precisely why you're here, Brooks replied. Pentagon wanted experienced combat officers involved. Too many projects designed by men who've never heard a shot fired in anger. The senator moved to the head of the table, commanding attention naturally. Let me be clear about congressional expectations. We want effective equipment, not gold-plated boondoggles. Captain Steele will have substantive input on design and testing. His combat experience is an asset, not an advisory footnote. Harrison's jaw tightened visibly. Of course, Senator. Excellent. Brooks checked his watch. I have other appointments, but I'll return for progress updates. Dr. Wright, walk me out. I have questions about the propulsion system. As Wright and the senator departed, an uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Harrison gathered his papers with quick, angry movements. We'll reconvene tomorrow at 0800. Review the materials tonight, Captain. Try to provide constructive input rather than blanket criticism. With that, he stalked from the room, followed by most of the others. Soon only Steele, Romano, and the CIA man Donovan remained. Well, that went about as well as a tank in quicksand, Romano observed dryly. Harrison has significant investment in ASR 110, Donovan said quietly. Your arrival threatens that investment. Steele studied the intelligence officer. Why tell me this? Donovan shrugged. Let's just say some of us prioritize national security over corporate interests. He moved toward the door, then paused. Watch Harrison. He didn't get where he is by playing fair. After Donovan departed, Romano chuckled. Making friends already, I see. Not here for friends, Johnny. Steele gathered the design folders. Here to make sure good men don't die in badly designed tanks. Just like Korea. Romano's voice softened. How's civilian life treated you, Captain? Steele's expression darkened. I never left the Army, Sergeant. Just moved from combat to training. And the leg? Steele tapped his cane against his right leg. Hurts when it rains. Hurts when it doesn't. Doctor says I'm lucky to have kept it. And Mrs. Steele? She must be proud of Michael making major. Pain flashed across Steele's face. Margaret passed 3 years ago, cancer. Romano's weathered face fell. Jesus, Captain, I'm sorry. Life goes on. Steele's tone made clear the subject was closed. Tell me about this project, the real story. Romano glanced toward the door, then lowered his voice. ASR 106 is the red-headed stepchild. All the money and talent flow to 110. Harrison's got friends at Titanium Defense. Military-industrial complex at work, Steele muttered. Something like that. Romano hesitated. But there's more. Intelligence reports suggest the Soviets are deploying their new vehicles specifically along the Fulda Gap. Steele went still, where Michael is stationed. Yes, sir, and word is they've developed a new anti-tank missile that can penetrate any armor we currently field. The implications hung heavy in the air. Steele's son and his men would be the first to face these weapons if hostilities erupted. Then we'd better build something that can survive Soviet missiles, Steele said finally. Romano nodded. That's why I requested you, sir. You suggested your name to Wright, who took it to Senator Brooks. Romano smiled grimly. We need the Iron Mike touch on this one. I'm not the same man from Korea, Johnny. None of us are, sir. Romano gathered his tools. But some things don't change. Like knowing the difference between a tank that wins battles and one that gets men killed. Steele stood, leaning heavily on his cane. Let's see the workshop. I want to understand what we're working with. As they walked through the facility, Steele observed the activity around him with a professional eye. Engineers huddled over drafting tables. Technicians assembled components. In one area, a wooden mock-up of a turret stood surrounded by measuring equipment. ASR 106 workspace, Romano explained, cramped compared to 110's facilities. Through a large window, Steele could see a more spacious area where a full-scale vehicle prototype sat surrounded by technical staff. That's Harrison's baby, Romano said. The ASR 110 Gladiator prototype. Twice our budget, triple our staff. Steele studied the vehicle. Heavily armored, conventional layout, impressive weapons systems. Looks like a tank destroyer, not a reconnaissance vehicle. That's because it is. Harrison's building what defense contractors want to sell, not what troops need. They continued to a small workshop area filled with parts, tools, and several incomplete chassis models. Welcome to the island of misfit toys, Romano announced. Everything ASR 106 is allocated. Our Wright waited for them, sleeves rolled up, hands dirty with mechanical grease. Not what I expected from a chief engineer, Steele observed. Wright smiled. I believe in hands-on leadership, Captain. Theory only gets you so far. Eleanor served, Romano explained. Air Force mechanical engineer. Her husband was a bomber pilot shot down over Germany in 4. Understanding passed between the three veterans, an unspoken recognition of shared experience. Senator Brooks is quite the advocate for our project, Wright said, wiping her hands on a shop rag. Surprising, given Harrison's corporate connections, Steele replied. Brooks lost a nephew in Korea, tank commander whose vehicle wasn't up to the job. Wright's expression was grim. He takes equipment development personally. As he should. Wright led them to a drafting table covered with design sketches. These are the official ASR 106 concepts you saw in the meeting. And these, she pulled out a hidden drawer, are what we've been developing unofficially. Steele examined the alternative designs, more practical, better crew protection, reasonable weapon configurations. Why the secret designs? Harrison rejects anything that doesn't fit his vision, Wright explained. But with you here, backed by Brooks, we might have a chance to pursue these properly. Steele laid the designs side by side, his tactical mind evaluating each. We need 4 variants. Present them as a family of vehicles with modular components. Harder to reject the entire concept. Wright nodded appreciatively. Exactly my thinking. I'll need to see the ASR 110 specifications, Steele continued. Understand what we're competing against. That might be difficult, Wright cautioned. Harrison guards those closely. I have some ideas, Romano interjected with a mischievous grin. A knock at the workshop door interrupted them. Lieutenant Colonel Donovan entered, expression serious. Captain Steele, a moment? Steele followed the CIA man to a quiet corner. Donovan handed him a sealed envelope. Latest intelligence from Fulda came through secure channels an hour ago. Steele opened the envelope, scanning the contents. His face hardened as he read. Soviet 8th Guards Army has deployed new reconnaissance elements directly opposite your son's position, Donovan explained quietly. They're testing our reactions, probing for weaknesses. The report included aerial photographs, Soviet vehicles in forward positions, new missile systems being installed. Michael's unit has no effective countermeasure against these missiles, Donovan continued. If tensions escalate, he left the sentence unfinished. He didn't need to complete it. Steele understood the stakes all too well. Why tell me this? Steele asked, though he suspected the answer. Because ASR 106 might be the only solution that arrives in time, Donovan replied. ASR 110 is designed for production 2 years from now. We need something deployable within months. Steele carefully folded the report. I'll need everything you have on Soviet deployments along the border. Already arranged. Donovan glanced toward Wright and Romano. Trust them. They understand what's at stake. He turned to leave, then added, Harrison has a private meeting with titanium defense representatives tonight. Might be worth knowing what they discuss. After Donovan departed, Steele rejoined the others, his expression giving nothing away. Bad news? Wright asked perceptively. Complicated news. Steele laid out the intelligence report. We have less time than anyone realizes. Wright and Romano studied the photographs, understanding dawning in their expressions. Those missile systems could cut through our current armor like butter, Romano said soberly, and they're positioned directly opposite my son's unit, Steele added quietly. Wright looked up, determination hardening her features. Then we'd better get to work. The next morning's project meeting had a different energy. Steele arrived early, having spent most of the night reviewing designs and specifications. He had discarded his Class A uniform for more practical fatigues. The captain's bars on his collar seemed to gleam under the fluorescent lights. Harrison entered precisely at 8, flanked by representatives from Titanium Defense. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Steele already seated at the head of the table. Captain, that seat is traditionally mine. Steele didn't move. New traditions today, Colonel. Before Harrison could respond, Senator Brooks entered with Dr. Wright and several military officers Steele didn't recognize. Gentlemen, Brooks announced, allow me to introduce Major General Peterson from Army Materiel Command and Colonel Winters from the Armor School at Fort Knox. The new arrivals took seats as Harrison struggled to hide his surprise. Senator, I wasn't aware we were expanding the Oversight Committee. Not oversight, Colonel. Integration. Brooks nodded to Steele. Captain, you have the floor. Steele stood, moving with purpose despite his cane. After reviewing current designs, I've identified critical deficiencies in both ASR 106 and 110 programs. Harrison bristled. You haven't been cleared to review ASR 110 documentation. I cleared him, Brooks interjected smoothly. National security trumps program secrecy, Colonel. Steele continued as if the interruption hadn't occurred. Current Soviet deployments along the Fulda Gap include new anti-tank missile systems with extended range and penetration capabilities. Our existing armor cannot withstand these weapons. He distributed folders containing satellite imagery and intelligence reports sanitized for broader consumption. Both ASR programs as currently designed would produce vehicles vulnerable to these threats. Neither would provide our troops adequate protection or offensive capability. Harrison leaned forward, face flushing. ASR 110 is specifically designed with enhanced armor protection. At the cost of deployment capability, Steele countered. Too heavy for air transport, too slow for effective reconnaissance. And ASR 106 is too lightly armored to survive modern battlefields, Harrison shot back. On that we agree, Steele replied calmly, which is why I'm proposing a redesign of both programs. He activated a slide projector, displaying new schematics. 4 vehicle variants built on a common chassis, modular components that can be exchanged in the field. Armor sufficient to protect against small arms and shell fragments. Weapons configurations tailored to specific missions. The designs were elegant in their practicality. Even Harrison fell silent studying them. Variant 1, Rattlesnake, fixed 105mm gun with limited traverse, 12 anti-tank missiles. Ambush and fire support role. The image showed a low-profile vehicle with a distinctively angled hull. Variant 2, Mongoose, turreted 76mm gun, 16 missiles, general reconnaissance and screening. This design featured a small turret offset to the right, allowing for a lower profile. Variant 3, Hornet, no main gun, 24 missile tubes, long-range anti-armor specialist. The third design eliminated the turret entirely, replacing it with banks of missile tubes. Variant 4, Scorpion, 6-wheel configuration for rapid deployment, 105mm gun, 8 missiles, urban and road reconnaissance. The final design showed a sleek wheeled vehicle that could be deployed by air without disassembly. Common drivetrain, common electronics, interchangeable parts where possible, Steele concluded. Reduced logistics, footprint, simplified maintenance, lower production costs. A murmur of appreciation ran through the room. Even the Titanium Defense representatives looked impressed. General Peterson spoke first. Estimated development timeline? 6 months to first prototype, 9 to field testing. Wright answered promptly. Production costs, asked Colonel Winters. 30% less than current ASR 110 projections, Steele replied. Modular design allows for economies of scale. Senator Brooks nodded approvingly. And deployment capability? C-130 transportable without disassembly for the tracked variants. C-123 for the wheeled model, Steele said. Operational within hours of arrival in theater. Harrison finally found his voice. This is completely outside program parameters. The defense contract specifications have been amended, Brooks interrupted, sliding a document across the table. Presidential authorization. These vehicles are now priority development under accelerated procurement rules. Steele watched Harrison's face as the implications sank in. The colonel's carefully constructed empire was crumbling before his eyes. There's one more thing, Steele added. All variants will incorporate a new armor configuration. He displayed the final slide, a layered armor design combining steel, aluminum, and ceramic composites. Tests indicate this configuration will defeat Soviet anti-tank missiles while maintaining weight requirements. Impossible, Harrison declared. No light armor can stop those missiles. It doesn't stop them, Wright explained. It defeats them through dissipation and controlled deformation. Captain Steele's concept uses angled surfaces and sacrificial panels to disrupt the missile's shape charge effect. General Peterson leaned forward with interest. You've tested this? Preliminary ballistic modeling is promising, Wright confirmed. We need full-scale testing. Authorize, Brooks said immediately. Priority access to Aberdeen Proving Grounds. Harrison stood, barely containing his fury. Senator, this completely undermines months of development work. Titanium Defense has invested millions in the original ASR-110 concept, and they'll be fully compensated for that investment, Brooks replied smoothly. But national security requirements take precedence over contractual inertia. The titanium representatives exchanged glances, clearly calculating new profit opportunities in the revised program. In fact, Brooks continued, I believe titanium's production capabilities would be well suited to the modular components Captain Steele has designed. The corporate executive nodded. We would certainly be interested in discussing new contract parameters. Harrison watched his support evaporate in real time. His face went from red to pale as he realized his position was untenable. Colonel Harrison will continue managing overall program integration, Brooks announced, offering a face-saving compromise. Captain Steele will lead technical development with Dr. Wright. Harrison had no choice but to nod agreement, though his eyes promised retribution. As the meeting adjourned, Steele gathered his materials, aware of Harrison's glare burning into his back. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Senator Brooks approached, speaking quietly. Well played, Captain, but watch your back. Harrison has friends in high places. I'm more concerned about Soviet missiles than Pentagon politics, Steele replied. They're equally dangerous in their own ways, Brooks warned. Harrison won't forgive being outmaneuvered. After Brooks departed, Romano sidled up. You just painted a target on your back, Captain. Better mine than my son's, Steele said grimly. How quickly can we build a prototype? With the new authorizations? 4 months if we push. Make it 3. Michael's unit doesn't have 4 months. As they spoke, Steele noticed Lieutenant Colonel Donovan watching from across the room. The CIA man gave an almost imperceptible nod of approval before disappearing through a side door. Wright joined them, excitement barely contained. We'll need to expand the team. I have some engineers in mind who've been sidelined by Harrison. Get them, Steele ordered, and I want daily updates on Soviet deployments along the border. Already arranged, Wright confirmed. Donovan is providing intelligence feeds directly to our secure terminal. Steele nodded, mentally calculating timelines and resources. We'll start with the Mongoose variant, best balance of capabilities for immediate deployment. As they walked toward the workshop, an aide hurried up with a telephone message slip. Urgent call for Captain Steele. Steele read the message, his expression unchanging, though his hand tightened on his cane. I need to take this privately. In a small office, he dialed the secure number. After authentication protocols, a familiar voice came through. Dad, is that you? Michael. Steele's voice softened at his son's voice. Are you all right? Fine, but things are tense here. Russians are moving equipment to the border every night. New stuff we haven't seen before. Steele closed his eyes briefly. I know, I've seen the reports. Something's brewing, Dad. The East Germans have evacuated civilians from the border zone. My platoon had 3 radar contacts penetrate our airspace yesterday. What's your readiness status? Official or actual? Michael's tone was grim. Officially, fully combat ready. Actually, our tanks couldn't stop those new Soviet missiles if they decided to come across. The words confirmed Steele's worst fears. His son was facing an enemy with superior weapons and no effective countermeasure. I'm working on something that might help, Steele said carefully. New vehicle designed specifically to counter those missiles. How soon? Not soon enough. Steele paused. Michael, if things deteriorate, I want you to request reassignment to training duties. A long silence followed. You know I can't do that, Dad. As your commanding officer, as my father, Michael interrupted, you taught me never to abandon my men. I won't start now. Pride and fear warred within Steele's chest. Just be careful, son. Always am, like father, like son, right? Michael's attempt at lightness fell flat. I should go. We're on alert status. Michael, Steele said quickly, I'm proud of you, more than I've probably said. Another silence. Thanks, Dad. That means a lot. After hanging up, Steele sat motionless, feeling the weight of responsibility pressed down upon him. Not just for the project, but for his son. For all the sons who would ride into battle in the vehicles he helped design. A knock at the door roused him from his thoughts. Wright entered, her expression suggesting she had news. One of Harrison's assistants just accessed our secure files, she reported. Downloaded everything on the new armor configuration. Steele nodded, unsurprised. Harrison is looking for ways to undermine us. There's more, Wright continued. Donovan reports unusual communications between Titanium Defense's CEO and an attaché at the Soviet embassy. Steele stood, suddenly alert. Corporate espionage? Possibly worse, the attaché is known KGB. The implications were staggering. Not just internal Pentagon politics, but potential treason. Keep this between us for now, Steele instructed. We need more information before making accusations. Wright nodded. Donovan is digging deeper. He'll report directly to you. As she turned to leave, Steele called after her. Doctor, what made you request me specifically for this project? Wright paused at the door. My husband was shot down over Dresden in 1944. Engine failure in his B-17. Soviet allies found the crash site first. They took pictures of his body, sent them through Swiss diplomatic channels. Her voice remained steady, but her eyes reflected old pain. The Soviets aren't just adversaries, Captain. They're an enemy that understands neither mercy nor honor. We need men like you who understand what we're really fighting for. After Wright departed, Steele stood at the window overlooking the facility. Below, engineers and technicians hurried between buildings. Ordinary men and women unaware that their work might determine the fate of nations. His reflection stared back from the glass. Older now, gray at the temples, lines etched by time and hardship. Not the young lieutenant from Korea anymore. But perhaps that man's determination still lived within him. Iron Mike, a name earned in blood and fire. Now it was time to earn it again. That evening, as darkness fell over Arlington, a solitary figure watched the research facility from a nearby parking structure. Colonel Harrison spoke quietly into a radio, observing Steele's office, where lights still burned despite the late hour. Our new problem is working late, he reported. The voice that answered carried a slight accent. How much does he know? Too much, and he has Senator Brooks' backing. Then we must accelerate the timetable. The technology must reach Moscow before production begins. Harrison's expression showed momentary doubt. This goes beyond our original arrangement. Your compensation will reflect the increased risk, Colonel. But do not forget what we have on you. Harrison's jaw tightened. I haven't forgotten. Good. Eliminate the problem if necessary, but secure those armor specifications first. The radio fell silent. Harrison stared at Steele's window, hatred burning in his eyes. Inside that office, unaware of being observed, Captain Marshal Iron Mike Steele worked tirelessly. On his desk lay photographs of Soviet deployments along the Fulda Gap. Beside them, a worn family photo of himself, his late wife, and their son in uniform. Outside, storm clouds gathered over Washington, a fitting harbinger for the tempest to come. May 1962, Arlington Research Facility. Dawn broke over the Arlington facility as Captain Marshal Steele limped across the empty parking lot. 3 weeks had passed since he'd taken control of the ASR-106 project. 3 weeks of 18-hour days, constant battles with bureaucracy, and the gnawing fear that time was running out. The security guard nodded respectfully as Steele badged in. Early as always, Captain. Wars aren't won by sleeping in, Jenkins. Inside, the facility was quiet, save for the hum of air conditioning and distant machinery. Steele made his way to the main workshop where the first prototype was taking shape. The skeleton of the Mongoose variant stood surrounded by tools and components, its angular hull gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights. Steele ran his hand along the armor plate, not just metal, but a promise to the men who would fight inside this machine. A covenant written in steel and signed in his name. Thought I'd find you here. Steele turned to see Technical Sergeant Johnny Romano entering with 2 steaming coffee cups. The mechanic's jumpsuit was already stained with grease despite the early hour. Couldn't sleep, Steele admitted, accepting the coffee. The leg? The sun. Romano nodded, understanding. No further explanation needed between men who had faced combat together. Michael radioed again last night, Steele continued after a moment. Soviet activity increasing along the border. Training exercises that look suspiciously like invasion preparations. All the more reason to get this beast operational. Romano patted the hull. Fabrication team completed the turret ring yesterday. Armor panels arrived this morning. Steele nodded approval. Let's hope Harrison doesn't find another way to delay them. That snake's been suspiciously quiet lately, which worries me more than his open opposition. Steele moved to examine the engine compartment. Where's the prototype power plant? Arriving today. Modified Continental diesel. 300 horsepower, lighter than spec but more reliable. The workshop doors swung open as Dr. Eleanor Wright entered, followed by a team of bleary-eyed engineers. Despite the early hours, she looked sharp and focused, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun. Captain, you're early again. Wright didn't sound surprised. We have the revised suspension designs ready for review. And I have news from Senator Brooks, she added more quietly. Harrison's team has requested additional funding for ASR-110. Claims they've had a breakthrough in armor development. Steele's eyes narrowed. Our armor design? Suspiciously similar, though they've modified it enough to claim independent development. Bastard stole our work, Romano muttered. But he can't steal our people, Steele replied. Or our determination. The mongoose will be operational before Harrison's team finishes debating paint colors. The day unfolded in a blur of activity. Engineers installed the engine while technicians fitted electrical systems. Steele oversaw every step, his exacting standards pushing the team to their limits. By noon, the vehicle had transformed from skeletal frame to recognizable fighting machine. She's taking shape nicely, observed Lieutenant Colonel Frank Donovan, materializing beside Steele as he inspected the turret mechanism. The CIA man's ability to appear unannounced had become a running joke among the team. Someone had even placed a bell on the workshop door, which Donovan somehow managed to enter without ringing. Any news worth sharing? Steele asked quietly. Donovan glanced around before responding. Our friends in East Germany report increased activity at their missile development facilities. They're rushing something into production. How soon? 4 months, maybe less. Steele absorbed this information with outward calm, though inwardly he recalculated timelines. We need to accelerate. Can you expedite the weapon systems? Already working on it. There's an experimental missile guidance system at White Sands that might suit our needs. Donovan hesitated. There's something else. Harrison met with the Titanium Defense Board last night. Closed-door session. And one of the attendees made a call to a known Soviet intelligence cutout immediately after. Steele's jaw tightened. You're suggesting corporate espionage? I'm suggesting worse, deliberate technology transfer. Before Steele could respond, a commotion erupted at the workshop entrance. Colonel William Harrison strode in, flanked by military police and a man in a Justice Department suit. Captain Steele, Harrison announced with barely concealed satisfaction, these gentlemen need to speak with you regarding a security breach. The workshop fell silent as all eyes turned to the confrontation. Steele straightened, facing Harrison with cold composure. What security breach would that be, Colonel? The Justice Department man stepped forward. Captain Steele, I'm Special Investigator Wilson. We're investigating unauthorized access to classified Soviet intelligence. Your security credentials have been flagged. Romano moved protectively towards Steele, but the captain stopped him with a subtle gesture. My access is authorized by Senator Brooks and General Peterson, Steele replied evenly, for project development purposes. Nevertheless, Wilson continued, we need to conduct an interview and review your access logs. Please come with us. Dr. Wright pushed through the gathering crowd. This is absurd. Captain Steele has the highest clearance for this project. This isn't about clearance, Doctor, Harrison interjected smoothly. It's about unauthorized sharing of classified information, specifically intelligence regarding Soviet deployments along the German border. Understanding dawned in Steele's eyes. This was Harrison's countermove. Unable to stop the project directly, he was attacking its leadership. How convenient that you've discovered this breach, Colonel, Steele observed. Just as our prototype nears completion. Harrison smiled thinly. Security is everyone's responsibility, Captain. I'm sure you'll be cleared quickly if there's no substance to the concerns. And in the meantime, you'll assume temporary control of ASR-106? As senior military officer, yes, just until this unfortunate matter is resolved. Steele recognized his trap. If he resisted, he'd appear guilty. If he complied, the project would fall back into Harrison's hands at a critical juncture. "Captain Steele isn't going anywhere," came a firm voice from the doorway. Senator Brooks entered, accompanied by a stern-faced Army general. The military police snapped to attention. "Senator," Harrison began, "this is a security matter." "This is a witch hunt," Brooks cut him off sharply. "And poorly timed." He turned to Investigator Wilson. "Your superiors should have consulted my office before proceeding. Captain Steele's intelligence access was specifically authorized by presidential order." Wilson blanched. "Sir, I wasn't informed." "Clearly," Brooks introduced his companion, "General Wallace has assumed overall supervision of the ASR program as of this morning by direct order from the Secretary of Defense." Harrison's face drained of color. "General, I wasn't notified of any change in command structure." "The notification is being delivered to your office as we speak, Colonel," General Wallace replied coldly. "Your services are being reassigned, effective immediately." "On what grounds?" Harrison demanded, composure cracking. "Security concerns," Wallace answered with deliberate irony. "Counterintelligence has questions about certain meetings you've attended recently." The tables had turned so rapidly that Harrison stood speechless. The military police, sensing the shift in authority, stepped away from Steele. "Investigator Wilson," Wallace continued, "your inquiry is suspended pending review. I suggest you contact your supervisor for clarification." As Wilson and the MPs departed, Harrison remained, his expression cycling through shock, anger, and calculation. "This isn't over," he said quietly to Steele. "For you it is," General Wallace interjected. "You are confined to quarters pending investigation. MPs will escort you to collect personal items from your office." After Harrison was led away, the workshop erupted in relieved conversation. Senator Brooks approached Steele with a grim smile. "That was closer than I'd like, Captain. Harrison's connections run deeper than we realized." "Thank you, Senator. Your timing was impeccable." "Thank Donovan. He contacted me the moment Harrison set this in motion." Steele glanced around, but the CIA man had vanished as mysteriously as he'd appeared. "Harrison is neutralized for now," Brooks continued, "but his corporate allies remain a concern. Titanium Defense stands to lose millions if their ASR 110 contract is reduced." "Money's a powerful motivator," Steele observed. "So is ideology." Brooks lowered his voice. "We've had Titanium's board under surveillance since Donovan raised concerns. There are troubling connections to Soviet trade representatives." General Wallace joined them, his weathered face serious. "Which is why we need your project operational immediately, Captain. The President was briefed this morning on the Soviet buildup. Intelligence suggests they're planning something significant." "How significant?" Steele asked, though he suspected the answer. "Worst case? Berlin Wall tensions escalate to military action, precipitating Soviet advances along the inter-German border." "My son's position." Wallace nodded grimly. "The 3rd Armored would face the brunt of any advance. They need your vehicles, Captain." The weight of responsibility settled more heavily on Steele's shoulders. No longer just a project, but a race against time with his son's life among the stakes. "We'll be ready," Steele promised. "First prototype operational within 2 weeks. Full production drawings a week after." "I'll hold you to that," Wallace said. "The Defense Secretary has authorized emergency production orders once your design is approved. No competitive bidding, no congressional hearings." As the general and senator departed, Romano and Wright rejoined Steele at the prototype. 2 weeks? Wright asked incredulously. "The guidance systems alone will take that long." "Then we work around the clock," Steele replied. "And we improvise where necessary." Romano nodded. "Like Korea, remember when we built that bridge with destroyed tank parts?" "And the radio made from scrounged equipment," Steele added, a rare smile crossing his features. "We'll make this work, Eleanor. We don't have a choice." Wright studied the two veterans, understanding dawning in her eyes. "This isn't just about beating the Russians for you, is it? It's about bringing your boys home." "It's always about bringing the boys home," Steele said quietly. "Everything else is just politics." Night had fallen by the time Steele finally left the workshop. The prototype Mongoose had made remarkable progress, its turret now mounted and operational, engine installed and tested. 2 weeks suddenly seemed possible, if barely. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few cars belonging to the night shift engineers. Steele limped toward his government-issued sedan, exhaustion making his injured leg drag more than usual. A shadow detached itself from behind a parked truck. "Captain Steele?" Steele turned sharply, hand instinctively reaching for a sidearm he no longer carried. Colonel Harrison stood illuminated by distant security lights, his uniform replaced by civilian clothes. You're supposed to be confined to quarters, Steele observed, muscles tensing for potential confrontation. An inconvenience, nothing more. Harrison's voice was eerily calm. My friends arranged a temporary absence. What do you want, Harrison? To offer you a choice. Harrison stepped closer. You're a patriot, Steele, old school, the kind who believes in black and white, good and evil. Is there another kind of patriot? Harrison smiled thinly. The kind who sees the bigger picture, who understands that today's enemy might be tomorrow's ally. Spare me the philosophy lesson. The Soviets will win eventually, Captain. They have more men, more resources, more determination. America is soft, divided. When the inevitable happens, smart men will want to be on the right side of history. Steele studied Harrison with newfound understanding. You're not just selling technology, you're selling yourself. I'm ensuring my future and offering you the same opportunity. By betraying my country? Harrison scoffed. Melodramatic as always. I'm proposing a business arrangement. Your armor design is brilliant. The Soviets will pay handsomely for the complete specifications. And my son, will they pay for his life too? He's stationed directly opposite their new missile systems. A flicker of discomfort crossed Harrison's face. Casualties are inevitable in any conflict. Individual lives can't outweigh historical forces. That's where you're wrong. Steele's voice hardened. Individual lives are the only thing that matter. Not politics, not ideology, not historical forces. People. Then you've made your choice. Harrison's expression darkened. A pity. You could have provided for your son's future. I am providing for his future by ensuring he has one. Harrison nodded as if expecting this answer. Admirable, if short-sighted. Unfortunately, this complicates matters. His hand moved inside his jacket. Steele tensed, preparing to defend himself despite his bad leg. Before either man could act, headlights swept across the parking lot as a vehicle approached. Harrison hesitated, then backed away. This conversation isn't over, Captain. The offer remains open, for now. As Harrison melted into the darkness, the approaching vehicle stopped nearby. The window lowered to reveal Dr. Wright behind the wheel. Captain, is everything all right? Steele watched the shadows where Harrison had disappeared. No, but it will be. He climbed into Wright's car, the encounter replaying in his mind. Harrison's betrayal was now confirmed, but the extent of the conspiracy remained unknown. You look like you've seen a ghost, Wright observed as she drove. Worse, a traitor. Steele described his conversation with Harrison. Wright listened in growing alarm. We need to report this immediately. To whom? If Harrison escaped confinement, he has accomplices within the military. We don't know who to trust. Donovan, then. Steele nodded. First thing tomorrow. Tonight, we focus on the prototype. Harrison's involvement means the timeline is even more critical. Wright glanced at him. You're not going home, are you? No time. The guidance system needs calibration. You can't work 24 hours a day, Marshal. Even Iron Mike needs rest. Steele looked out at the passing streetlights. I'll rest when my son is safe. Wright didn't argue further. She understood dedication born of personal stakes. Her own husband had never returned from war. The pain of that loss still shaped her life 2 decades later. Back at the facility, the night shift worked under bright lights. Progress continued on multiple fronts: engine calibration, turret mechanisms, electrical systems. Steele moved from station to station, reviewing, suggesting, encouraging. In a quiet corner, Romano was disassembling a missile guidance unit, methodically laying out components for inspection. Making progress? Steele asked, lowering himself onto a stool beside his old friend. Getting there, these new infrared seekers are finicky beasts. Romano wiped grease from his hands. Something's bothering you beyond the usual, Harrison? Steele nodded, keeping his voice low. He approached me in the parking lot, tried to recruit me to his Soviet paymasters. Romano's face darkened. Should have shot the bastard. And create a diplomatic incident? He's more valuable alive. If we can track him, he might lead us to his contacts. You're thinking like a spook now. Romano shook his head. Leave that to Donovan. We build tanks, remember? Steele managed a tired smile. Tanks that work, unlike half the designs I've seen from the Pentagon's drawing boards. Speaking of which, Romano gestured toward a set of blueprints. I've been thinking about the Hornet variant. 24 missiles is excessive, makes the vehicle too tall, too visible. Steele examined the designs. You're right, reduce to 16, use the space savings for better armor on the missile compartment. As they discussed modifications, a young engineer approached hesitantly. Captain Steele, there's a secure call for you. In the communications room, Steele accepted the encrypted handset. Steele here. Captain, this is Major Reynolds, 3rd Armored Division Intelligence. The voice was tense, professional. I'm calling regarding your son, Major Michael Steele. Steele's grip tightened on the receiver. Is he all right? Yes, sir. But there has been an incident. Major Steele's reconnaissance patrol encountered Soviet advisors with East German forces, uncomfortably close to the border. Casualties? Negative, no shots fired. But the Soviets were demonstrating a new anti-tank system to their German allies. Your son's patrol observed the demonstration from concealed positions. Steele processed this information. What did they see? New missile launcher, vehicle mounted, test fired against tank hulks, penetrated their frontal armor like it was paper. The implications were clear. Soviet forces were preparing their East German proxies for potential conflict, showing them how to destroy NATO armor. Major Reynolds, I need details. Missile flight characteristics, launcher configuration, everything your son observed. Already being transmitted to your facility, Captain. Classified cosmic top secret. Major Steele insisted the information go directly to you. Thank my son for me when you see him. And tell him. Steele paused, emotion briefly overtaking professional detachment. Tell him I'm working on something that will help. After the call ended, Steele stared at the secure teletype machine as it printed the reconnaissance report. Each detail confirmed his worst fears while simultaneously providing crucial information for the Mongoose design. The Soviet missiles used a new guidance system that tracked heat signatures. Current NATO tanks had no countermeasures for such technology. But perhaps the Mongoose could incorporate defenses if they understood the threat. Steele brought the report to Wright and Romano. The 3 veterans pored over the details, identifying vulnerabilities and potential countermeasures. We need to modify the armor configuration, Wright concluded. Add heat-dissipating panels to confuse the seeker. And change the exhaust system, Romano added. Redirect engine heat away from the main hull. Steele nodded, mind racing with implications and solutions. Make the changes immediately. I want updated drawings by morning. As dawn approached, the facility hummed with renewed purpose. Word had spread about the Soviet missile demonstration, adding urgency to every task. These weren't abstract designs anymore, but vital shields for American soldiers and facing a clear and present danger. Steele worked alongside his team without rest, ignoring the pain in his leg and the exhaustion clouding his mind. Only when the prototype's engine roared to life for its first full test did he finally pause to appreciate their progress. The Mongoose's diesel engine growled with barely restrained power. Its squat, angular hull bristled with weapons. The 76mm main gun, coaxial machine gun, and missile launchers integrated into the turret sides. Not beautiful by conventional standards, but possessing the dangerous elegance of a predator evolved for survival. She sounds healthy, Romano observed proudly as they monitored engine performance. How soon until she moves under her own power, Steele asked. Track installation completes today. Tomorrow we could have her rolling. Wright joined them, clipboard in hand. Guidance systems are integrated. Turret traverses and elevates within specifications. We're ahead of schedule. For the first time in weeks, Steele allowed himself cautious optimism. Prepare for initial mobility tests tomorrow. I want this vehicle operational enough for a demonstration within a week. A week? Wright looked surprised. The original timeline was 2 weeks minimum. The timeline changed when my son watched Soviet missiles slice through American tank armor. Steele's tone left no room for debate. 1 week, whatever it takes. The week that followed tested every member of the ASR-106 team. Days blurred into nights as engineers, technicians, and fabricators worked relentlessly toward their accelerated deadline. Steele drove them hard, but drove himself harder, often working through the night while others rotated shifts. The Mongoose prototype evolved daily, tracks installed and tensioned, weapon systems calibrated, fire control computers programmed. Each system tested, modified, and retested until it met Steele's exacting standards. By day 6, the vehicle was ready for its first full operational test. The Arlington facility's small test track would provide limited evaluation, but enough to demonstrate basic capabilities before transfer to Aberdeen Proving Grounds for comprehensive trials. Dawn broke clear and cool as the Mongoose rolled from its workshop bay under its own power. The diesel engine rumbled confidently as the vehicle navigated to the starting position. A small crowd had gathered to witness the milestone. Engineers proud of their creation, security personnel, and VIPs including Senator Brooks and General Wallace. She looks impressive, Brooks observed as the vehicle maneuvered into position. Compact, but lethal. Function over form, Steele replied. Every angle serves a purpose, either for ballistic protection or signature reduction. Who's driving for the demonstration? I am. At Brooks's surprised expression, Steele added, no one drives a new vehicle design until I've tested it personally. Old habit from Korea. Despite protests from Wright about his injured leg in the confined driver's compartment, Steele climbed aboard the Mongoose. Romano joined him as gunner, while a young engineer operated the radio and mission systems. The interior was cramped but efficiently arranged, and every control within reach, every display visible without straining. Steele settled into the driver's seat, the familiar feel of armored vehicle controls bringing back memories of countless missions. Comms check, he called through his headset. Reading you 5 by 5, Wright responded from the observation post. Beginning mobility test, standard course, increasing speed incrementally. Steele guided the Mongoose forward, feeling the vehicle's response through the control levers. Initial movements were cautious, testing acceleration, braking, and steering sensitivity. As confidence in the machine grew, he increased speed, putting the vehicle through increasingly demanding maneuvers. The Mongoose performed admirably. Its suspension absorbed rough terrain while maintaining stability for the weapon systems. The engine delivered power smoothly across the range. Steering responded precisely to Steele's commands. Transition to tactical movement, Steele announced, shifting to combat driving techniques. The Mongoose surged forward, then executed a rapid hold-down maneuver behind an earthen berm. The turret traversed quickly, bringing weapons to bear on simulated targets while keeping the hull protected. Guidance systems online, Romano reported. Simulated missile lock achieved on all test targets. Weapon stabilization functioning within parameters, added the engineer. Fire control solution maintained through evasive maneuvers. Steele pushed the vehicle harder, testing the limits of its performance. The Mongoose responded like a living creature, seeming to anticipate his commands. This wasn't just a machine, but an extension of the crew's will, exactly as he'd envisioned. As the demonstration concluded, Steele guided the vehicle back to the observation area. The assembled officials broke into spontaneous applause as the Mongoose came to a precise halt before them. Steele emerged from the driver's hatch, face streaked with sweat, but eyes bright with satisfaction. For the first time since joining the project, he allowed himself a genuine smile. Impressive, General Wallace acknowledged. Very impressive. How soon until we can begin field trials at Aberdeen? Transport can be arranged for tomorrow, Wright answered. All systems are functioning within or exceeding specifications. Make it happen, Wallace ordered. I want a full demonstration for the Joint Chiefs within 2 weeks. As the crowd dispersed, Donovan materialized at Steele's side, speaking quietly. Congratulations, Captain, but we have a situation developing. Steele followed the CIA man to a private office where a secure teleprinter was receiving an encrypted transmission. This came in 10 minutes ago, Donovan explained. Eyes only from Berlin Station. The message was brief but alarming. Harrison had been spotted entering the Soviet embassy in East Berlin. Photographs confirmed his identity despite civilian disguise. More troubling, he carried a briefcase believed to contain technical documents. He's defecting, Steele realized, taking our designs with him. Worse, according to our source, he's not staying in the East. He's returning to the West after his meeting, which means he's an active spy, not a defector. Steele considered the implications. Can we arrest him? Donovan shook his head. Not without compromising our source in the Soviet embassy. Intelligence wants to monitor him, identify his network. While he delivers our technological advantages to the enemy, Steele's voice hardened. Unacceptable. There's more. Donovan handed over another report. Satellite reconnaissance shows increased Soviet tank concentrations near the Fulda Gap. They're conducting exercises less than 20 miles from your son's position. Steele scanned the report, noting the Soviet units involved, elite Guards tank divisions with their newest equipment. This isn't coincidence, he concluded. Harrison's information exchange and Soviet military movements are connected. My assessment as well, Donovan agreed, which creates a dilemma. Do we arrest Harrison and potentially trigger Soviet action, or allow his espionage to continue while we prepare countermeasures? The question had no easy answer. Military logic suggested sacrificing the individual to protect operational security. But Harrison's freedom meant continued technology transfer to an increasingly aggressive potential adversary. Where is Harrison now? En route to West Berlin by military transport. Expected arrival in 6 hours. Steele made his decision. Have him detained upon arrival. Technical documents seized, charged to be determined based on recovered evidence. The intelligence community won't like burning their surveillance operation. They'll like a Soviet armored assault across the German border, even less. Steele's tone was final. Harrison ends his treason today. Donovan nodded. I'll make the arrangements. He hesitated before adding, there's one more thing you should know. Your son's unit has been moved to forward deployment positions. First response if the Soviets come across. The news struck Steele like a physical blow. Michael's unit would face the full brunt of any Soviet advance, equipped with tanks vulnerable to the new missile systems. How soon can the Mongoose be combat ready? Donovan asked. Not just demonstrated, but in the hands of frontline units. Initial production could begin in 3 weeks with emergency authorization. First units operational within 2 months. That might not be soon enough. Donovan didn't elaborate further, but his implication was clear. Soviet intentions appeared increasingly hostile, with timetables potentially measured in weeks rather than months. After Donovan departed, Steele returned to the prototype, examining it with renewed urgency. The Mongoose represented more than a vehicle now. It was a race against both Soviet aggression and Harrison's betrayal. Wright found him there an hour later, still inspecting every detail of the vehicle. Marshal, the transport team is ready to move the prototype to Aberdeen tomorrow morning. Steele nodded absently, mind elsewhere. What aren't you telling me? Wright asked perceptively. Something's changed. Steele hesitated, weighing operational security against the need for his chief engineer to understand the stakes. Harrison's in East Berlin, selling our designs to the Soviets. Wright paled. My God, and the missiles Michael reported may be deployed against us sooner than we thought. Steele straightened, decision made. We're changing plans. The Mongoose doesn't go to Aberdeen tomorrow. But General Wallace ordered, it goes to Germany, directly to the 3rd Armored Division. Wright stared in disbelief. That's impossible. It's a prototype, not a combat-ready vehicle. It will be combat-ready by the time it arrives. Steele's voice carried absolute conviction. Select your best engineers. They're flying to Germany with the vehicle. We'll complete final systems integration on site. The Pentagon will never approve this. They will when they understand the alternative. Steele outlined the intelligence showing Soviet preparations. We're sending the only weapon system capable of countering their new missiles directly to the potential battlefield. Wright processed this information, her expression shifting from shock to determination. I'll assemble a team, and I'm going with them. I expected nothing less. Steele managed a grim smile. Because I'll be on that transport too. But your role here is finished now that the prototype is operational. My place is with the frontline units. Steele didn't add his personal motivation to protect his son. That remained unspoken but understood. What about General Wallace, Senator Brooks? I'll inform them once arrangements are finalized. Better to ask forgiveness than permission in this case. By evening, preparations were underway. A C-124 Globemaster cargo aircraft was requisitioned for emergency transport of critical military equipment. The Mongoose was prepared for air movement. Sensitive systems secured, fluids drained. Steele selected the deployment team carefully. Wright to oversee technical integration, Romano for mechanical systems, and 3 specialized engineers for weapons, electronics, and communications. Each person chosen not just for technical expertise, but for the ability to work under pressure in field conditions. As night fell, Steele made the difficult calls to his military superiors. General Wallace was predictably furious until presented with the intelligence assessments. Senator Brooks proved more immediately supportive, offering to run interference with the Defense Department. You're taking an enormous professional risk, Captain, Brooks warned. If you're wrong about Soviet intentions, then I've delivered a prototype slightly ahead of schedule to its intended users, Steele replied. But if I'm right, we'll have the only effective countermeasure in place when it's needed most. And if Harrison has already compromised the design? The Mongoose the Soviets see on paper is not the Mongoose we're delivering. We've made modifications specifically to counter the threats Michael observed. Brooks sighed. I hope you know what you're doing, Iron Mike. So do I, Senator, so do I. The final hours before deployment passed in organized chaos. Equipment packed, documentation secured, final adjustments made to the vehicle. Through it all, Steele drove his team relentlessly, checking and rechecking every detail. Shortly before midnight, as the Mongoose was being loaded onto a transporter for movement to the airfield, Steele received an urgent call from Donovan. Harrison's gone, the CIA man reported without preamble. The detention team found his military transport empty upon arrival in Berlin. He never boarded in East Berlin. He knew we were on to him, Steele concluded. Where would he go? Most likely back to the Soviets. Permanently this time. Donovan paused. There's worse news. SIGINT has intercepted communications suggesting accelerated Soviet military preparations. The exercises near Fulda are expanding in scope and scale. Timing? Unknown, but measured in days, not weeks. Steele absorbed this news with outward calm, belying inner turmoil. Our departure is scheduled for 0600. The Mongoose should reach Germany by tomorrow evening. I've arranged military escort for your aircraft. Highest priority clearance across the Atlantic. Donovan hesitated. This is outside normal channels, Captain. If you're wrong, I'm not wrong. Steele's certainty stemmed not from intelligence reports, but from instinct honed in combat. The same instinct that had saved his life and those of his men in Korea. The storm is coming, Frank. I can feel it. After ending the call, Steele stood alone in the empty workshop. Around him lay the accumulated work of weeks of intensive effort. Blueprints, prototype components, test results. The physical manifestation of American engineering excellence and the dedication of men and women who understood the stakes of the Cold War. From his pocket, Steele withdrew a worn photograph of Michael in his uniform. His son had his mother's eyes, but Steele's determined jaw. A good man, a good soldier. Everything a father could hope for in a son. Hold on, Michael, he whispered to the image. We're coming. Dawn painted the eastern sky as the C-124 Globemaster thundered down the runway at Andrews Air Force Base. Inside its cavernous cargo bay, the Mongoose prototype was secured with heavy chains, surrounded by equipment crates and nervous engineers. Captain Marshall Steele sat strapped into a canvas jump seat, feeling the vibration of the massive aircraft through his injured leg. The pain was a constant companion now, aggravated by exhaustion and stress, but he welcomed it. Pain meant focus. Focus meant survival. Across from him, Dr. Eleanor Wright reviewed technical documents, seemingly oblivious to the aircraft's stomach-churning ascent. Beside her, Romano dozed despite the noise, a skill developed through years of catching sleep wherever and whenever possible during war. 8 hours to cross the Atlantic, another 2 for transport from Rhine-Main Air Base to the 3rd Armored Division headquarters. If all went as planned, the Mongoose would be operational on German soil within 24 hours of departure. If all went as planned, military experience had taught Steele the folly of expecting plans to survive contact with reality. Halfway across the Atlantic, reality intruded in the form of an urgent radio message from Washington. Steele was summoned to the cockpit where the aircraft commander handed him a decoded transmission. Flash traffic priority Alpha to Captain M. Steele ASR project from Pentagon Command Center. Subject, situation update Fulda sector. Soviet forces commenced large-scale exercises. 0300 Zulu. Elements, 8th Guards Army deployed forward positions. Vicinity Fulda Gap. NATO forces heightened alert status. 3rd Armored Division deployed defensive positions per contingency plans. Colonel W. Harrison confirmed defected to Soviet forces. Extent of compromise unknown. Mongoose arrival priority 1. Sync Europe personally monitoring. Acknowledge receipt. Steele read the message twice, his expression revealing nothing to the anxious pilot. Authenticate and acknowledge, he instructed. Inform Pentagon we are on schedule for arrival 1800 Zulu. Yes, sir. Any reply regarding the situation report? Tell them we'll be ready. Returning to the cargo compartment, Steele briefed his team. No point concealing the escalating crisis. Each person needed to understand what awaited them in Germany. We'll be entering a potential combat zone, he concluded. Anyone who wishes to remain at Rhine-Main upon arrival may do so. No questions asked, no reflections on your record. No one spoke. No one needed to. The expressions on their faces, determination, fear, resolve, told Steele everything. This hand-picked team would see the mission through, whatever came. Then let's prepare the Mongoose for immediate deployment upon landing, he ordered. Romano, begin system checks. Dr. Wright, coordinate your engineers for final integration. We hit the ground running. The remainder of the flight passed in focused activity. Systems previously deactivated for transport were methodically brought back online. The 76mm gun was checked and rechecked. Missile guidance units programmed with the latest threat parameters. When the aircraft finally touched down at Rhine-Main, organized chaos awaited them. Military police escorted the team to a secure hangar where an advance party from 3rd Armored Division waited. A tall major stepped forward as Steele descended from the aircraft. For a moment, Captain and Major stared at each other, protocol momentarily forgotten. "Hello, Dad," Major Michael Steele said finally, extending his hand. Marshal Steele ignored the hand, pulling his son into a brief but fierce embrace. "You look tired, son." Pot calling the kettle black. Michael grinned, gesturing to the dark circles under his father's eyes. "When did you last sleep? February?" "Sleep's overrated." The elder Steele turned serious. "Your unit status?" Michael's expression sobered. "Forward deployed along likely Soviet advance routes. Tense but holding. The Russians have brought up at least 3 tank divisions that we can confirm, more suspected beyond visual range. And the new missiles? Everywhere. Every BTR, every BMP we've observed has the new launcher system. If they come across, our M48s won't stand a chance." Steele nodded toward the mongoose being unloaded from the aircraft. "Then it's a good thing we brought you something new." Michael studied the prototype with professional interest. "That's the ASR 106? Doesn't look like much." Neither did David, but Goliath still fell. Steele led his son toward the vehicle. "Let me show you what American ingenuity can accomplish when properly motivated." For the next hour, father and son examined the mongoose in detail. Steele explained each innovation, each design decision, each capability specifically developed to counter Soviet advantages. "The armor configuration is revolutionary," he concluded, "designed specifically to defeat those new missiles. The angled surfaces disrupt the shape charge effect, while the composite layers absorb and dissipate remaining energy." Michael ran his hand along the turret's distinctive profile. "And you're certain it works?" "As certain as testing allows. The real proof will come against actual Soviet weapons, which may happen sooner than any of us would like," Michael observed grimly. "Intelligence reports suggest they might be planning more than exercises." Before Steele could respond, the hangar doors burst open as a staff car screeched to a halt. A 4-star general emerged, trailed by aides and security personnel. "General Hartman," Michael whispered urgently, "Kink Europe himself." Steele straightened to attention as the general approached, aware of his rumpled flight suit and unshaven face. "Captain Steele," General Hartman extended his hand, "your reputation precedes you, both from Korea and more recently from Pentagon scuttlebutt." "Sir." "At ease, Captain. Is this the famous mongoose I've been hearing about?" Hartman circled the vehicle appraisingly. "Doesn't look like much." "Function over form, General. It does what it needs to do." "Which is?" "Defeat the new Soviet missiles while delivering sufficient firepower to neutralize their armor advantages." Hartman nodded thoughtfully. "Bold claims. How soon can you demonstrate them?" "The vehicle can be fully operational within 12 hours. Combat ready within 24. You have 6. Hartman's expression was grave. "Intelligence indicates Soviet forces may be preparing for more than exercises. We're moving to DEFCON 3 as a precaution." The implications hung heavy in the air. DEFCON 3 meant military readiness for potential combat. The Cold War was warming dangerously. "There's more," Hartman continued. "Your former colleague, Colonel Harrison, has surfaced in East Berlin, holding press conferences, claiming to expose American warmongering while praising Soviet peace initiatives." "Propaganda cover for his espionage," Steele concluded. "Precisely. And he specifically mentioned a new American weapon system under development. He claims it threatens the strategic balance." Steele exchanged glances with Michael. "The mongoose." "Almost certainly. Which means the Soviets know it's coming. The question is, do they know how to counter it?" The question remained unanswered as preparations accelerated. The mongoose was moved to a secure maintenance facility at the 3rd Armored Division headquarters, where final assembly and testing could proceed. Steele drove his team relentlessly through the night. Systems integrated, weapons loaded, communications calibrated to NATO frequencies. By dawn, the mongoose stood ready for field testing, its angular silhouette somehow more menacing under European skies than it had appeared in Arlington. As the sun rose over the German countryside, Steele climbed stiffly into the commander's hatch. His body protested the abuse of continuous work without rest, but his mind remained sharp, focused on the task at hand. "Final systems check," he ordered through the intercom. "Engine and drive systems green," reported Romano from the driver's position. "Weapons and fire control green," confirmed Wright, temporarily serving as gunner. "Communications green," added the signals engineer. "Linked to division tactical net." Steele nodded satisfaction. "Move out. Test course alpha." The Mongoose's diesel engine growled as Romano guided the vehicle from the maintenance bay onto the proving grounds. Despite minimal sleep, the mechanic handled the controls with precision born of decades of experience. The test course, simulated battlefield conditions, rough terrain, obstacles, firing positions. Steele directed the mongoose through increasingly complex maneuvers, testing every system under operational conditions. By mid-morning, they had verified basic functionality. The mongoose performed as designed, its unique capabilities evident even in limited testing. Particularly impressive was its missile guidance system, capable of acquiring and tracking multiple targets simultaneously. As they concluded this final test sequence, an urgent call came over the tactical radio. All units. This is Division Command. Execute watchful eye. Repeat, execute watchful eye. This is not an exercise. Steele recognized the code phrase for maximum alert status. Something had changed along the border. Return to base immediately, he ordered Romano. Best speed. The mongoose surged forward, tracks churning earth as it raced back toward headquarters. Inside the command center, organized urgency prevailed as officers monitored tactical displays and communications. Michael met them at the entrance, his expression tense. Multiple Soviet units moving to forward positions. They've brought up missile batteries and artillery under cover of darkness. Invasion preparations? Possible. Or extreme pressure tactics. Michael led them to a situation map. They're positioning forces here, here, and here, classic preparation for breakthrough operations. Steele studied the map, recognizing the tactical pattern from his own training. The Soviets were positioning for potential offensive operations while maintaining plausible deniability. Where's your unit deployed? Michael indicated a forward position directly opposite the largest Soviet concentration. We're the tripwire. If they come across, we'll be the first to know. And the first to die, Steele thought, but didn't say. Conventional American tanks against the new Soviet missiles would be a massacre. The mongoose is operational, he said instead. Not fully tested, but functional. One vehicle won't change the strategic balance, Michael observed. No, but it can provide critical battlefield intelligence on Soviet capabilities, and possibly save lives if the worst happens. A senior officer approached, recognizing Steele from earlier briefings. Captain General Hartman requests your presence for an emergency consultation. In the division commander's office, Hartman stood before a secure communications terminal, his face grave as he acknowledged Steele's arrival. Mongoose status? Operational, sir. Limited testing completed successfully. Hartman nodded. Good, because we may need it sooner than anyone anticipated. He gestured to the communications equipment. Washington is on the line. The Secretary of Defense wishes to speak with you directly. Steele accepted the secure handset, aware of the extraordinary nature of such direct communication. Captain Steele reporting, Mr. Secretary. Captain, came the authoritative voice of the civilian Pentagon chief. I'll be brief. Your former colleague Harrison has provided the Soviets detailed information about the Mongoose project. We believe they're positioning forces to neutralize its advantages before production can begin. Understood, sir. General Hartman has authorization to deploy the prototype in response to any Soviet provocation. Your team will support this deployment. Understood? Yes, sir. Steele hesitated, then added, Sir, with respect, one vehicle cannot significantly impact the tactical situation. We're aware, Captain, but the psychological impact of the mongoose appearing on the battlefield despite Harrison's defection has political value. It demonstrates American resilience and technological superiority. Politics, Steele thought wearily. Always politics. There's more, the secretary continued. Intelligence suggests Harrison may be personally involved in Soviet forward operations, possibly as an advisor on countering the mongoose's capabilities. The betrayal cut deeper than Steele had anticipated. Not just selling secrets, but actively participating in potential combat operations against American forces, against his own son. Thank you for the information, Mr. Secretary. After the call concluded, Hartman studied Steele's expression. Your thoughts, Captain? The mongoose should deploy with Major Steele's unit, he answered without hesitation. Forward position where it can observe Soviet activities and respond immediately to any incursion. Putting all our eggs in one basket? Hartman questioned. Putting our best asset where it can make the most difference, Steele countered, and sending a message to both Harrison and his Soviet handlers. Hartman considered this, then nodded decisively. Approved. Effective immediately, the mongoose and your technical team are attached to Charlie Company, 2nd Battalion, 33rd Armor. Major Steele's command. I'll need to go with them, sir, as technical advisor. I assumed as much, Captain. Hartman almost smiled. Try not to start World War III in the process. Within hours, the mongoose was moving toward the inner German border, accompanied by a platoon of conventional M48 Patton tanks from Michael's company. The contrast was striking, the angular, purpose-built mongoose alongside the rounded hulls of tanks designed a generation earlier. Steele rode inside the prototype, monitoring systems and advising the crew. Wright had remained at division headquarters coordinating technical support, while Romano insisted on accompanying the vehicle as driver. Just like old times, the sergeant observed as they traveled. You, me, and a tank heading toward trouble. The trouble's gotten more sophisticated, Steele replied, studying the tactical map. Those new missiles can engage beyond visual range. So can ours now, Romano patted the fire control system affectionately. American ingenuity, Captain. Still the best in the world. The convoy reached its forward deployment area by late afternoon. A wooded ridge overlooking rolling fields provided both concealment and excellent observation of potential Soviet approach routes. Michael positioned his forces with professional precision, M48s in hull-down positions covering likely avenues of advance. Infantry with anti-tank weapons securing the flanks. The mongoose in a central position where its advanced sensors could monitor the widest area. As evening approached, Steele joined his son atop the ridge, surveying the border zone through binoculars. In the distance, East German guard towers stood silhouetted against the darkening sky. Beyond them, the occasional flash of vehicle lights betrayed Soviet positions. They're closer than regulations permit, Michael observed. Pushing boundaries, testing our response. Steele nodded agreement. Classic pressure tactics. Make your opponent think you might attack at any moment. Force them to reveal defensive positions. Wear down their readiness through constant alerts. Is it just tactics, or are they actually preparing us something? With the Soviets, it's often both. Steele lowered his binoculars. They create conditions that give them options. Attack if opportunity presents. Withdraw if resistance proves too strong. Michael studied his father's profile in the fading light. You've been preparing for this moment your whole career, haven't you? Not specifically this moment, Steele admitted. But yes, preparing to face Soviet armor has been central to American military planning since 1945. And now it comes down to us, here, today. It always comes down to individual soldiers in specific places, Michael. Grand strategy means nothing without men willing to hold the line. As darkness fell, both men returned to their respective command posts. Michael to coordinate his company's defensive positions, Steele to monitor the Mongoose's surveillance systems. The night passed tensely but without incident. Occasional movement detected across the border. Radio traffic suggesting normal Soviet operations, nothing indicating imminent attack. Dawn brought fog rolling across the border zone, reducing visibility to mere yards. Perfect conditions for an armored assault, concealing movement until vehicles emerged at close range. All units maintain maximum alert, Michael ordered over the tactical net. Visual observation compromised. Rely on sound and thermal detection. Inside the Mongoose, Steele activated the advanced thermal imaging system, one of the vehicle's most significant technological advantages. Through swirling fog, the heat signatures of vehicles and personnel appeared as bright ghosts against the cooler landscape. Contact, Romano reported tensely. Multiple heat signatures approaching the border zone, consistent with armored vehicles. Steele studied the display. Soviet reconnaissance vehicles moving carefully along the border fence. Testing, probing, not yet an incursion but provocative nonetheless. Maintain position, he instructed. Record all movements for intelligence analysis. The Soviet vehicles paralleled the border for several minutes before withdrawing into East German territory. A textbook reconnaissance mission, gathering information without technically violating territorial integrity. As the morning progressed, fog began lifting, revealing an altered landscape. Where previously only occasional Soviet vehicles had been visible, now rows of tanks and armored personnel carriers stood arrayed just beyond the border. A demonstration of force too deliberate to be coincidental. Division Command reports similar deployments all along the sector, Michael informed his father as they observed the Soviet positions. They're showing muscle. No, Steele corrected, focusing his binoculars on a particular vehicle near the Soviet command element. They're showing him. Through magnification, a figure in civilian clothes could be seen conversing with Soviet officers. Even at distance, Steele recognized Colonel Harrison's distinctive posture and gestures. Bastards directing them, he growled, probably telling them exactly where to look for the mongoose. Michael recalibrated his own binoculars. Confirmation of treason, if we needed it. More than treason, he's actively participating in military operations against American forces. Steele's voice hardened. Against his own countrymen. Before Michael could respond, the tactical radio crackled with urgent reports. Soviet vehicles were advancing toward the border fence at multiple points along the sector, not yet crossing, but positioning themselves within meters of West German territory. All units, maintain positions, Michael ordered calmly. Weapons tight. I repeat, weapons tight. No firing unless directly engaged. Tension stretched minutes into hours as the standoff continued. Soviet and American forces watched each other across the narrow strip of death that separated east from west. One mistake, one misinterpreted movement could ignite the conflict both superpowers had avoided for decades. By mid-afternoon, the situation had developed into a full crisis. Soviet forces remained deployed in provocative positions. NATO reinforcements moved toward the border area. In Washington and Moscow, emergency meetings convened to manage the escalating confrontation. Division Command reports diplomatic channels activated, Michael informed his father, as they monitored the situation. Direct communication between Washington and Moscow to defuse the situation. Steele nodded absently, his attention fixed on the Soviet command vehicle where Harrison had been observed earlier. Something about its positioning nagged at his tactical instincts. That command vehicle is too exposed, he noted. No Soviet commander would place himself so vulnerably unless, understanding dawned suddenly, it's bait. What? They're displaying Harrison and their command element deliberately, hoping we'll attempt to neutralize them or capture Harrison. Michael studied the position with new understanding, creating justification for retaliation. Exactly. If American forces fire first, they have their pretext for crossing the border. A classic military political trap. Create a tempting target, wait for the opponent to make the first aggressive move, then respond with overwhelming force while claiming self-defense. We need to inform Division Command immediately, Michael began, reaching for his radio. Before he could complete the call, movement erupted across the border. Not toward American positions, but parallel to them. Soviet vehicles repositioning, creating gaps in their formation. They're opening lanes, Steele observed with growing alarm, preparing for breakthrough operations. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Soviet artillery had begun moving forward. Missile launchers elevated to firing position. Every indicator pointed toward imminent offensive action. All units prepare for possible enemy contact, Michael ordered, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. Gunners identified targets. Weapons remained tight until ordered otherwise. Inside the Mongoose, Romano and the crew maintained combat readiness, systems humming at optimal performance. The vehicle represented America's best hope for countering Soviet technological advantages if the confrontation turned hot. As tensions peaked, a single vehicle detached itself from the Soviet lines, a small, unarmed staff car flying a white flag. It approached the border crossing point slowly, clearly visible to observation posts. Division reports diplomatic vehicle requesting crossing, came the update over tactical channels. Senior officer with communication from Soviet command. Minutes later, confirmation arrived. Vehicle approved for crossing. Captain Steele requested to observe meeting at checkpoint Alpha. Steele exchanged glances with his son. Why me specifically? Unknown. Request came directly from Division Command. Priority Alpha. Something about the situation felt wrong. A diplomatic approach in the midst of military positioning, a specific request for Steele's presence. Too many irregularities to be coincidence. Nevertheless, orders were orders. Steele departed the forward position in a jeep with military police escort, proceeding to the checkpoint where representatives from both sides would meet on neutral ground. As his vehicle approached the designated meeting point, Steele caught sight of the Soviet delegation already waiting, 3 officers in formal uniform and 1 figure in civilian clothes. Colonel William Harrison stood among the Soviet officers, his expression unreadable as Steele's jeep came to a halt. The Cold War's most dangerous confrontation had become personal. The checkpoint stood in no man's land, a small island of concrete between 2 hostile worlds. American flags fluttered alongside NATO banners on one side. Soviet red stars dominated the eastern approach. In between, a table had been set up on neutral ground, surrounded by armed guards from both nations, maintaining a fragile peace. Captain Marshall Steele stepped from the jeep, his weathered face betraying no emotion as he confronted Colonel William Harrison. The man's betrayal was now complete, standing openly among Soviet officers, wearing civilian clothes but radiating military bearing. Captain Steele, Harrison called as Steele approached. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Wasn't aware I had a choice, Colonel. Steele emphasized the rank with subtle disdain. Or do you prefer comrade now? Harrison smiled thinly. Still the same Iron Mike, direct to a fault. He gestured to the Soviet officers. Allow me to introduce Colonel Petrov, liaison officer for the 8th Guards Army, and Major Baronov, strategic operations. Steele acknowledged the Soviet officers with a curt nod but refused the offered handshakes. I'm not here for social niceties. State your business. Very well. Harrison nodded to Petrov, who opened a leather document case. We have intelligence indicating NATO forces are preparing provocative actions along the border. Specifically, deployment of a new weapons system designed for offensive operations. The mongoose, Steele said flatly. That's what this show of force is about. The Soviet Union cannot permit deployment of destabilizing technology, Petrov stated in heavily accented English. Colonel Harrison has informed us of this vehicle's capabilities. Its presence threatens peaceful relations between our nations. Steele fixed Harrison with a level stare. And what exactly did the colonel tell you? That the mongoose represents a new generation of American aggression, Harrison replied smoothly, designed specifically for rapid breakthrough operations into East German territory. Interesting interpretation. Steele's voice remained calm despite the blatant lie. Considering the vehicle was designed as a defensive countermeasure to your new anti-tank missile systems. Petrov and Harrison exchanged glances. The Soviet officer spoke carefully. We request immediate withdrawal of this prototype vehicle from the border zone as a gesture of peaceful intent. Or, Steele prompted, or we cannot guarantee restraint from our forces, Baronov interjected. Provocations require appropriate responses. The threat hung in the air, thinly veiled but unmistakable. Remove the mongoose or face potential Soviet action. Steele considered his response carefully. This was no longer merely a military confrontation, but a complex political chess match with lives at stake. I'll convey your concerns to my superiors, he said finally, but I should note that American forces are deployed defensively in response to your provocative positioning of armor along the border. A misunderstanding, Harrison countered. Soviet forces are conducting scheduled exercises. Your intelligence has misinterpreted their purpose. Like you misinterpreted your oath to your country? Steele kept his voice level, despite rising anger. Your obligation to protect American lives rather than endanger them? For the first time, Harrison's composure cracked. You understand nothing, Captain. This is about preventing war, not starting it. The arms race leads nowhere but mutual destruction. Noble sentiments from a man selling military secrets. Harrison leaned forward, lowering his voice. The Soviets already know about the mongoose. They've developed countermeasures based on my information. If hostilities begin, your precious prototype won't save those boys on the line. Including my son? Steele asked quietly. A flicker of something, regret perhaps, crossed Harrison's face before vanishing. Casualties are inevitable in conflict. Better a few now than millions later. That's the difference between us, Harrison. You see numbers, I see people. Steele straightened, addressing the Soviet officers directly. I'll relay your message, but understand this. American forces will respond decisively to any incursion across the border, prototype or no prototype. As Steele turned to leave, Harrison called after him. The Cold War can't be won, Mike, only survived. Steele paused without turning. Some things are worth fighting for, Bill. Pity you forgot that. The journey back to the American positions gave Steele time to process the encounter. Harrison's betrayal ran deeper than mere espionage. He'd convinced himself his actions served a greater good, making him more dangerous than a simple traitor motivated by greed. More troubling was his confirmation that Soviet forces knew about the mongoose and had potentially developed countermeasures. The technological advantage the prototype represented might be compromised before it could even be deployed. At the command post, Michael waited with Romano and a communications officer from division headquarters. What happened? Michael asked as soon as his father entered. Harrison's showing his true colors, Steele replied grimly. The Soviets are demanding withdrawal of the mongoose from the border area. Under threat of what? They didn't specify, but their force positioning speaks volumes. The communications officer handed Steele a message form. Sir, General Hartmann requests immediate report on the Soviet approach. Steele quickly drafted his assessment, detailing both explicit statements and implied threats. The situation was deteriorating toward potential armed confrontation, with Soviet forces using the mongoose as pretext for aggressive posturing. What now? Romano asked after the report had been transmitted. We wait for orders, Steele replied, though waiting had never been his strong suit, and prepare for all contingencies. Michael unfolded a tactical map on the command table. If they come across, they'll use these approaches. Natural terrain channels for armor. Steele studied the map, decades of tactical experience analyzing potential scenarios. They'll lead with reconnaissance elements, testing our response. Main armor will follow if they don't encounter significant resistance. And those new missiles? They'll deploy them here and here, Steele indicated elevated positions overlooking likely engagement areas. Maximum coverage of approach routes. The planning session continued as darkness fell over the border zone. Across no man's land, Soviet forces maintained their threatening posture, illuminated occasionally by searchlights sweeping the frontier. Shortly before midnight, orders arrived from Division Command. The directive was clear. Maintain positions, keep the mongoose deployed but concealed, avoid provocations while preparing for defensive operations. They're calling Harrison's bluff, Michael observed after reading the orders. For now, Steele agreed. But bluffs have a way of becoming commitments when pride is at stake. The night passed in tense alertness, both sides watching for any movement that might signal hostile intent. By dawn, fatigue weighed heavily on all personnel, the constant readiness taking its toll on even the most disciplined soldiers. As the sun rose over the German countryside, Steele stood atop an observation post, surveying Soviet positions through field glasses. Something had changed overnight. The threatening formations had shifted subtly, with heavier elements moved slightly back from the border. They're creating operational depth, he murmured to Michael, who had joined him for morning assessment. Classic preparation for actual combat operations rather than mere demonstration. Escalating rather than backing down, Michael agreed. Division intelligence reports increased communications activity in Soviet command networks. Before Steele could respond, an urgent call came through their tactical radio. All units, multiple fence breaches, Sector Charlie, reconnaissance elements crossing border. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. The moment both men had prepared for yet hoped would never arrive had come. Soviet forces were violating West German territory. Michael immediately issued orders to his company. All elements assume defensive positions, weapons tight, engage only identified hostile forces within established rules of engagement. Steele headed for the mongoose, where Romano and the crew had maintained combat readiness through the night. The prototype represented their best chance of countering Soviet technological advantages if the situation deteriorated to full combat. Status, he demanded as he climbed aboard. All systems operational, Romano reported from the driver's position. Fuel at 95%, weapons fully loaded. Move to position Alpha, Steele ordered, designating a hull-down location with excellent fields of fire across likely approach routes. Maintain communications blackout except for emergency tactical net. As the mongoose maneuvered into position, reports continued flooding the command network. Soviet reconnaissance vehicles had penetrated 2 kilometers into West German territory. American forward elements were falling back according to defensive plans, maintaining contact while avoiding direct engagement unless fired upon. The strategy was clear. Document Soviet aggression without providing justification for escalation. Let the political ramifications of border violation unfold while preserving military options. From the mongoose's concealed position, Steele observed Soviet BMP infantry fighting vehicles advancing cautiously along a rural road. Their distinctive silhouettes represented the cutting edge of Soviet military technology, each armed with the new anti-tank missile system that had prompted the mongoose's development. Target identified, reported the gunner. Soviet BMP at 1,000 meters. Request permission to engage. Negative, Steele countermanded. Observe and record only. No engagement unless directly threatened. The minutes stretched into hours as Soviet incursion expanded methodically. A calculated provocation rather than all-out attack, probing NATO defenses while remaining below the threshold that would trigger major response. By mid-morning, the situation had developed into full crisis. Soviet reconnaissance elements operated openly within West German territory. American forces shadowed their movements while maintaining defensive posture. In Washington and Moscow, emergency communications attempted to contain the escalating confrontation. Division reports diplomatic channels active, Michael informed his father during a brief strategy conference. Direct communication between Moscow and Washington, Soviets claiming protective measures in response to NATO provocations. Standard procedure, Steele noted grimly. Create a crisis, then offer to resolve it on your terms. The tactical radio crackled with a new alert. All units be advised, High-value enemy command element identified entering Sector Bravo. Occupied staff car with diplomatic markings followed by BMP escort. Steele and Michael exchanged glances. Harrison, they said simultaneously. Bringing him forward suggests they're planning something significant, Steele observed. He wouldn't risk exposure unless the stakes warranted it. Michael studied his tactical display. The vehicle is moving along Route 12, heading directly toward our position. Not coincidence, Steele concluded. He knows the mongoose is here. He's coming for it specifically. The implications were immediately clear. If Harrison had indeed provided the Soviets detailed information about the mongoose's capabilities, he might also be guiding them toward its location for neutralization or capture. Change position immediately, Steele ordered the mongoose crew. Maximum discretion. New location Delta 3. As the vehicle moved under concealment to its new position, Steele formulated a counter-strategy. Harrison's intimate knowledge of the mongoose project made him exceptionally dangerous. But that knowledge might also be turned against him. Romano, he called to the driver, execute deception plan Alpha. A grim smile spread across the mechanic's weathered face. Just like Korea, Captain. Bait and switch. While the mongoose relocated, a specially prepared M48 Patton tank from Michael's company moved into the position they had vacated. From a distance, with canvas covers strategically placed, it could be mistaken for the prototype by observers expecting to see the mongoose at that location. Soviet command vehicle continuing on Route 12, reported the tactical radio. Now 500 meters from checkpoint Bravo. From their new position, Steele observed Harrison's vehicle through the mongoose's advanced optical system. The traitor sat in the backseat of a staff car, directing Soviet officers with animated gestures, clearly providing real-time intelligence based on his knowledge of American dispositions. He's leading them right to our previous position, Steele observed, confirming he's actively participating in combat operations against American forces. This crossed a line even beyond espionage. Harrison wasn't merely providing intelligence but directing enemy forces in potential combat against his former comrades, against his own countrymen. The legal and moral implications were profound. All units be advised, came a new alert. Division Command has designated Colonel William Harrison as hostile combatant. Repeat, Harrison is classified hostile combatant participating in enemy military operations. The designation changed everything. No longer protected by diplomatic considerations, Harrison had placed himself squarely in the category of legitimate military target. Steele faced a momentous decision. The mongoose had clear firing solution on Harrison's vehicle. A single 76mm round would eliminate a traitor actively endangering American lives. Yet such action would almost certainly escalate the crisis beyond diplomatic resolution. Your orders, Captain? The gunner asked quietly, aware of the gravity of the moment. Before Steele could respond, the tactical situation changed dramatically. Soviet BMPs surrounding Harrison's vehicle suddenly deployed infantry who established defensive positions. More significantly, vehicle-mounted missile launchers elevated to firing position, oriented toward the M48 they mistakenly believed to be the mongoose. They're preparing to engage, Steele realized. Harrison's convinced them to neutralize the prototype as primary objective. That puts our decoy crew at risk, Michael noted with concern. They're not expecting to be targeted specifically. Steele made his decision. All units, this is Captain Steele. Soviet forces are preparing to engage our positions. Mongoose moving to counter-battery position. Prepare for imminent contact. The Mongoose's engine roared as Romano guided the vehicle rapidly toward a position that would provide firing solution on the Soviet missile carriers while remaining partially concealed from direct observation. Target acquisition, announced the gunner as the mongoose settled into position. BMP missile launchers bearing 060, range 800 meters. Deep by Schwan. Load heat, Steele ordered, selecting high-explosive anti-tank rounds. Target locked, confirmed the gunner. Steele hesitated for a crucial moment. Opening fire would cross a threshold from which there could be no return. Yet failing to act might result in American casualties as Soviet missiles struck the decoy position. The decision was made for him as a distinctive vapor trail marked the launch of a Soviet missile toward the M48 decoy. The new anti-tank weapon streaked toward American positions with deadly intent. Engage targets, Steele commanded. Fire at will. The Mongoose's 76mm gun roared in response, sending a heat round directly into the Soviet BMP that had launched the missile. The vehicle erupted in flames as the round penetrated its light armor, ammunition cooking off in secondary explosions. "Target destroyed," reported the gunner, already traversing to the next threat. Engaging second BMP, the Mongoose fired again, its advanced fire control system compensating for movement and range. Another Soviet vehicle shuddered under the impact, its missile launcher disintegrating in a shower of twisted metal. Across the tactical net, reports flooded in as the border confrontation erupted into actual combat. Soviet forces firing on American positions, NATO units responding with controlled counterfire, the limited probe transforming rapidly into genuine military engagement. Through the targeting optics, Steele observed Harrison's staff car reversing hastily away from the developing battlefield, protected by BMP escorts. The traitor was retreating while the forces he had helped position engaged in combat he had helped precipitate. "Target Harrison's vehicle?" asked the gunner, noting Steele's focus. For a moment, Steele considered it. One round would end the threat Harrison posed forever. Justice delivered on the battlefield for betrayal that endangered countless lives. "Negative," he decided finally. "Primary targets remain missile carriers threatening our forces." The Mongoose continued engaging Soviet vehicles with devastating effectiveness. Its advanced targeting systems and powerful gun making short work of the lighter BMPs. Within minutes, 3 Soviet vehicles burned, while others hastily withdrew toward the border. "Mongoose to all units," Steele broadcast. "Soviet missile capability in Sector Bravo neutralized. Be advised, enemy forces withdrawing toward border checkpoint." The tactical situation had shifted dramatically. What began as Soviet probe had met unexpected resistance, disrupting their operational plan. Harrison's promise of easy victory against unprepared NATO forces had proven fatally flawed. As suddenly as it began, the fighting subsided. Soviet reconnaissance elements pulled back toward East German territory, leaving their destroyed vehicles as smoking monuments to miscalculation. Division reports Soviet forces withdrawing across all sectors, Michael confirmed as the Mongoose rejoined the main American position. Diplomatic channels indicate they're claiming scheduled conclusion of exercises rather than acknowledging defeat. "Saving face," Steele observed, important in this kind of confrontation. The immediate crisis appeared to be resolving, but Steele harbored no illusions about its conclusion. Harrison remained at large, his knowledge still dangerous. The Soviets had tested NATO resolve and found it unyielding, but would incorporate lessons learned into future planning. As American forces consolidated positions intended to the handful of wounded from brief engagements, a secure communication arrived from division headquarters. General Hartman personally requested Steele's presence for immediate consultation. At division command, Steele found not only Hartman but also representatives from Washington, including Senator Brooks, who had supported the Mongoose project from its inception. "Captain Steele," Hartman greeted him with uncharacteristic warmth, "your prototype performed exceptionally well under actual combat conditions." "The vehicle performed as designed, sir," Steele replied modestly. "Credit belongs to the entire development team. Nevertheless, your leadership proved decisive." Hartman gestured to Senator Brooks. "Washington is extremely interested in your first-hand account of the engagement." Brooks stepped forward, extending his hand. "Captain, your actions today may have prevented a major escalation. Soviet forces withdrew across all sectors once the effectiveness of the Mongoose became apparent." "And Harrison?" Steele asked. Brooks and Hartman exchanged glances. "Last seen returning to East Berlin," the general answered. "Intelligence suggests his reception may not be warm. The Soviets don't appreciate failure." "They'll still have the technical data he provided," Steele pointed out. "The Mongoose's advantages won't remain exclusive for long." "Which is why we've accelerated production authorization," Brooks interjected. "Full production of all 4 variants will begin immediately. The first operational units will deploy within 60 days. This represented unprecedented speed for military procurement, bypassing numerous bureaucratic hurdles that typically delayed fielding of new weapon systems. "There's more," Hartman continued. "In recognition of the Mongoose's combat debut, the system has been officially designated the M551 Sheridan Armored Reconnaissance Vehicle, full military designation, not prototype status." Steele absorbed this news with professional satisfaction. The vehicle he had helped develop would enter American military service with proven combat effectiveness. Men like his son would have the equipment they needed to counter Soviet advantages. "What happens now, sir?" he asked. "That depends partly on you, Captain." Hartman produced a folder bearing official seals. "These orders authorize your promotion to major and assignment as technical liaison for Sheridan deployment. You'd oversee integration of the vehicles into frontline units, starting with the 3rd Armored Division. The offer was professionally significant, recognizing Steele's contributions while positioning him to continue influencing the project's implementation. Alternatively, Brooks added, the president has expressed interest in having you return to Washington. Your insights on Soviet capabilities and strategic planning would be valuable at the policy level. A desk job, Steele translated mentally, politics rather than practical application. The offer was flattering but fundamentally unsuited to his temperament and talents. Thank you for both options, gentlemen, he replied diplomatically. I'll need time to consider them. Of course, Hartman agreed. In the meantime, your primary concern should be the Mongoose, or rather the Sheridan prototype. It's being transferred to secure facilities for comprehensive evaluation following combat engagement. After the meeting concluded, Steele found himself momentarily at loose ends. The crisis had been averted, at least temporarily. The Mongoose had proven itself in combat. His son's unit had emerged largely unscathed from potential disaster. Yet Harrison's betrayal and its consequences remained unresolved. The traitor had escaped justice, at least in American terms, though Soviet disappointment might prove equally punishing in its own way. Romano found Steele staring thoughtfully at the Sheridan prototype as technicians prepared it for transport. She did good today, the mechanic observed proudly. Saved some lives. Yes, Steele agreed, but the next confrontation will be different. The Soviets will adapt based on what they learned. They always do. So do we. Romano shrugged philosophically. Been that way since the first caveman picked up a sharper rock than his neighbor. The observation's simple wisdom brought a rare smile to Steele's face. The technological race between East and West would continue. Advantages gained, neutralized, and superseded in the relentless cycle of military development. What remained constant was the human element, the courage, commitment, and character of those who served. Any word on your next assignment, Captain? Romano asked. Or should I say Major? Not official yet, Steele cautioned. And I haven't decided. Washington would be safer, but you'd rather be where you can make a difference directly, Romano finished for him. Always were a hands-on officer. Their conversation was interrupted as Michael approached, still in combat gear from overseeing his company's security operations. Dad, he greeted, military formality temporarily set aside. Divisions arranged transport for your return to Washington tomorrow morning. Steele nodded acknowledgement. Your unit status? Returning to normal defensive posturing, the Russians have pulled back to their standard positions. Michael hesitated before adding, we've been officially commended for our handling of the incursion, particularly the Sheridan's performance. Pride colored his words, though professionally restrained. The son had witnessed his father's creation in combat and seen its effectiveness firsthand. You'll be receiving new equipment soon, Steele informed him. Production Sheridans. First units off the line are earmarked for 3rd Armored. Michael's expression brightened. That will significantly enhance our capabilities against their missile threats. It's not a perfect solution, Steele cautioned. The Soviets will develop countermeasures based on Harrison's information and today's engagement, but we'll have a fighting chance. Michael's certainty reflected the optimism of his generation. That's all any soldier really asks for. Later that evening, as Steele packed his few belongings for the return journey, a secure message arrived from intelligence sources in Berlin. Harrison had indeed returned to East German territory, but had not been seen since entering Soviet military headquarters. The terse report concluded with a single line, status unknown, presumed detained for debriefing. Steele understood the euphemism. Harrison would be extracted of any remaining useful information, then discarded. The Soviets had little use for failures, regardless of previous service. A harsh end, yet fitting in its way for betrayal so profound. The following morning dawned clear and crisp, fall giving way to winter across the German countryside. Steele stood beside the transport aircraft that would return him to Washington, saying farewell to those with whom he had shared the Mongoose's journey from concept to combat. Wright had already departed for Arlington to oversee technical modifications based on combat lessons. Romano would remain temporarily with the prototype, ensuring its safe return to American facilities. Michael had returned to his company, continuing the vigilant watch along NATO's volatile frontier. As ground crews completed pre-flight preparations, a staff car approached the airfield. General Hartman emerged, walking briskly towards Steele with purpose in his stride. Captain, I'm glad I caught you before departure. The general extended an envelope bearing official seals. Your promotion orders, officially Major Steele now. Thank you, sir. Steele accepted the envelope with appropriate military courtesy. There's something else. Hartman's expression grew serious. We've received confirmation from intelligence sources. Colonel Harrison is dead. The statement hung in the morning air, neither celebratory nor mournful. Simple fact. Soviet security services? Steele asked, though he already suspected the answer. Apparently not, Hartman replied. He escaped from Soviet custody during transfer between facilities. Made it to the Berlin Wall crossing point at Checkpoint Charlie. Trying to return to the West? This surprised Steele. Harrison must have known he would face trial for treason. According to witnesses, he was shouting that he had critical information for American authorities. Something about Soviet plans beyond the technology transfer. Hartman paused. East German border guards shot him while attempting to cross. He died before American personnel could reach him. Steele absorbed this information silently. Harrison's final moments remained enigmatic. A genuine attempt to make amends, or another calculated move in a game that had ultimately consumed him. His final words were recorded by witnesses, Hartman continued. He said, "Tell Steele he was right." Does that mean anything to you, Major? Steele thought back to their confrontation at the border checkpoint. His assertion that individual lives mattered more than abstract political calculations. That some principles were worth fighting for. It might, General, he answered it finally. A private matter between soldiers. Hartman nodded, not pressing further. The mongoose, the Sheridan, has changed the tactical equation. Your contribution to that achievement won't be forgotten. As the general departed and Steele boarded the aircraft, he reflected on the journey from Arlington workshop to German battlefield. The countless hours of design and testing, the political battles and bureaucratic hurdles, all culminating in a brief border confrontation that had validated their efforts while highlighting the continuing dangers of the Cold War world. The aircraft engines roared to life, vibrating through the fuselage as Steele settled into his seat. Through the window, he could see the distant border that separated east from west, an artificial line drawn by politicians but defended by soldiers. Men like his son, who would now have better tools for that defense because of the Mongoose Project. As the plane lifted into German skies, Steele's thoughts turned toward future challenges. The promotion to major opened new possibilities for continuing his life's work, ensuring American soldiers had the equipment they needed to accomplish their missions and return home safely. Harrison had chosen a different path, believing the Cold War could only be managed through accommodation rather than strength. His betrayal had nearly cost American lives, yet his final actions suggested recognition of his error. Too late for redemption, perhaps, but acknowledgement nonetheless. Iron Mike Steele had earned his nickname in Korean combat through determination and courage under fire. He had lived up to that legacy again in developing the vehicle that now bore the proud designation M551 Sheridan. Not through battlefield heroics this time, but through equally vital work ensuring future soldiers would have every possible advantage when their moment of truth arrived. As the aircraft banked westward toward America, Steele closed his eyes, finally allowing exhaustion to overcome vigilance. The mongoose had proven its worth. Michael and his comrades would have the protection they deserved. The mission ultimately had been accomplished. The legacy of Iron Mike would continue not just in military records or the pages of Life magazine, but in the lives preserved by technologies he had helped bring to fruition. In a world divided by ideology and threatened by nuclear annihilation, such contributions might seem small. Yet in the calculation that mattered most to Marshal Steele, the lives of individual soldiers serving their country with honor, they made all the difference. Epilogue, January 1991, Saudi Arabia, Operation Desert Storm. The desert night was illuminated by distant explosions as coalition forces engaged retreating Iraqi armor. Among the American units pursuing Saddam Hussein's broken formations was a battalion of M551 Sheridan tanks, their distinctive profiles cutting sharp silhouettes against the star-filled sky. Colonel Michael Steele stood atop the command variant, binoculars trained on burning Iraqi vehicles. 30 years had passed since the Sheridan's combat debut on the German border. The vehicle had evolved through multiple updates and improvements, yet still bore the fundamental design his father had helped create. All elements maintain pursuit, he ordered through the tactical net. Sheridans take lead position, conventional armor support at flanks. The acknowledgments came crisply as his units maneuvered across the desert landscape. The Sheridans, lighter and faster than the massive Abrams tanks, spearheaded the advance against retreating Iraqi forces. Inside his command vehicle, a faded photograph was secured beside tactical displays. It showed a younger Marshal Steele standing atop a burning tank in Korea, American flag raised defiantly. The image that had inspired generations of American soldiers and embodied the spirit that had carried through to Desert Storm. Marshal Steele hadn't lived to see this vindication of his work. Heart failure had claimed him in 1986, after years of continued service, ensuring American armored forces maintained technological superiority. But his legacy lived on in the vehicles that now pursued Iraqi forces across Middle Eastern sands. Michael touched the photograph briefly, a soldier's tribute to both father and mentor. "You were right, Dad," he said quietly. "Some things are worth fighting for." The Sheridan tanks continued their advance, Steele's legacy rolling forward into history.